One thing that strikes me about the science of geology is its connectedness. It forms the foundation of everything we know and everything that surrounds us. It tells us where we've been and how we got here and where we're going. Science isn't something that is self-contained. It permeates art, language, math, philosophy, everything. I'm very interested in cross disciplines, and so I wanted to explore not just geology, but how geology has affected the way we think and create. This led me to the writings of Leonardo da Vinci. He was obsessed with observation and the way that natural processes branched into a larger system that is our Earth. It was through intense observation that he made correct discoveries about geology far before they became known. These observations and conclusions were recorded in the Leicester Codex. The first discovery I'll talk about is an observation that Leonardo scribbled in his notebook. How the rivers have sawn through and divided the members of the Great Alps one from another, and this is revealed by the arrangement of the stratified rocks, in which from the summit of the mountain down to the river one sees the strata on one side of the river corresponding with those on the other. So in other words, he was able to look at the layers of rocks on two opposite sides and realize that the layers were the same, and therefore the river dividing it had sawn down the land and divided rock that was once connected. The second discovery Leonardo was able to observe was that rivers deposit large, angular rocks near their sources in high mountains, and then as the river flows, the rocks are gradually worn down into smaller and more rounded shapes, until finally it becomes fine enough to become clay. For the sake of brevity, I'll stick to these two examples, but there are so many things Da Vinci was able to discover for himself about fossils and geological patterns. I thought these two discoveries were interesting because we learned about them in class. Driving these discoveries and at the center of Da Vinci's scientific efforts in geology was his obsession with proving his own theory about the Earth. This theory, summarized by Stephen Jay Gould in a collection of essays on natural history, was the comparison and causal union of the Earth as a macrocosm and the human body as a microcosm. This theory of Earth I personally find appealing, and it's a very artful theory. I'm sure that being an artist, this is why the comparison captured his obsession. There is indeed a basis for the parallels between the human body and the Earth, but it's definitely an imperfect metaphor. Da Vinci had a problem in that he could not prove an instance in which water coursed upward through the Earth as blood courses up and down in the body. At first, it probably seemed probable. After all, there are streams at the top of mountains. He only needed to figure out how the water got up there. Of course, we know now that it's water vapor, but in order for Da Vinci's theory to work, water needed to course upwards through the earth, not the sky. Blood reaches our brains by coursing upwards through our blood vessels. It doesn't rise as vapor and rain down in our heads. He did develop hypotheses, but ultimately realized why each was flawed. His first hypothesis was that the heat of the sun draws water up through internal streams that run through the mountains. But this doesn't work for two reasons. Number one, the tops of mountains are closest to the sun. So if his theory was correct, the water at the top would be warm, but it's not, it's very cold. And number two, this natural process would work best in the summer when there is maximum solar heat. But mountain rivers often have the lowest water level during this time of year. I apologize if you can hear rain in the background. There is unfortunately a pretty big rainstorm right now, so it's coming across in the background. Anyway, his second hypothesis was that the Earth's internal heat boils water in internal caverns, and this boiled water rises as vapor through mountain interiors. It then converts back to liquid form and bursts through the ground as a high spring. He realized this didn't work either because in order for this to be true, the roofs of internal caverns would be wet from the rise in steam, but they are often really dry. So he was never able to neatly prove his theory. What I find endlessly interesting is the perspective at which he approached geology. How art and earth science could be so deeply synergistic. Pamela Smith, in her book, The Body of the Artisan, a great book that I recommend, writes about how Leonardo would come to regard artistic creation as part of the natural order. and the artist's imitation of nature as an active ability to remake natural effects in the work of art through a deep understanding of natural causes. It was through an intense observation and understanding of natural processes that his art evolved into something more. I mean, this guy was the guy who dissected a horse just to sketch one. He had to know every muscle and how that muscle moved and interacted with the body as a whole. It was the same with his studies of water and rocks and landscape. It's amazing how much that era of art did to serve future scientific knowledge. I'll wrap up with another quote from the book, The Body of the Artisan, about how artisans of this era affected early modern science. Images become more important in knowledge making, and this in turn gave rise to the ideas that a materially real physical world could be known by viewing from a single universal point, and that once gained, this knowledge could be mathematized. The laws of vision became the laws of nature.